here we have, I'll read out the title so I get it right properly. We have Embracing Children with Additional Support or Learning Needs, and we've got Steph and Doris here to present this topic to us. So I'm sure you'll enjoy. Are you all in the right seminar? This is what you're expecting. Yeah? Okay. I'm personally just really excited to know that, often we see children who we find maybe challenging for different reasons, and we can feel quite ill-equipped, really, to be able to deal with those. And the little blurb that you've written, which really encouraged me, was just about how you don't necessarily need to have a big qualification in, learning needs or whatever it may be. But there are tips and practical points that hopefully you'll be able to help us with and infuse us with today. So thank you, Steph.
Thank you. Right, so we'll start with a few introductions. First of all, good afternoon, and I hope you've had a really good day so far. I know I have. I've really enjoyed it. Had a good lunch. Somebody mentioned this is the slot after lunch when you're kind of slumping. So we'll try to keep, we're going to do a bit of talking, a bit of overview, some kind of theoretical base. We'll intersperse that with some personal anecdotes, and then we are going to do some practical work in groups and some tips, and then I've got a leaflet for resources, which I didn't print off enough. I can go print off more, or we will upload that onto the Facebook page afterwards, okay? So we will be moving around a little bit. But just to start off with, I'm Stephanie Brock, and I'm originally from the States, but I've been living in Aberdeen for nearly 11 years. And my oldest son, I have 3 kids. My oldest son, Adam, has Down syndrome and autism, and a few other little letters behind his name. And he's the one who's kind of introduced me into this journey of what it means to kind of do life a bit differently. So I'm grateful to him for that, honestly. A few years ago, 2008, 2009, I found myself sitting in church and thinking, I'm always alone with Adam. I'm always kind of off to the side and dealing with it myself because nobody else knows what to do. And I thought, I'm articulate, and my husband's a theologian and does disability ministries, so we can talk about this stuff, but what about people who can't? What about families who are really struggling, or churches who don't know what to say? So I created this group called Welcoming Church Forum, and Grace was a very early part of that, and so we wanted to create a space where people could talk. And that's all we were about, is just workshops and places where people can talk and ask questions that they're maybe afraid to in other places, or say, this is what I'm angry about or what I'm struggling with, and figure out how we can kind of improve our dialogue. And I think we've been fortunate to do a lot of stuff with a lot of different people over the years. So I've been grateful for that. I will hand it over to Grace and introduce herself.
Thanks, Steph. Well, I'm Grace, and like Steph, I don't come from Scotland. You can probably guess. Any idea where I come from? Anyone know? Hey?
India?
Yeah, I am half Indian, but I'm also half Chinese. And I don't come from India, I'm Chindian, so the one nation where you get lots of Indians and Malays living and Chinese living together is Malaysia. So that's where I come from, and very much when I was young thought that I would have this perfect future planned out with my perfect children. And so my husband's Australian, and we met on this OM ship called the Doulos, and a few years after we had kids, they invited us to come back, this time with our family, and our youngest child, Callum, he was 1 when we rejoined, and he was showing a lot of developmental delays after a while, and it was very difficult to try and figure out what was wrong with him. But after we left the ships, we ended up coming to Scotland, and he was diagnosed here as having autism and a learning disability. So that was quite a horrendous time for me, as a parent, you go through this death of the dreams that you have for your child. But also then started the very interesting journey of, school was not a problem because you would have support put in place at school, and I felt safe with him at school. But it was, where we struggled was probably the church context, and one of the churches we were in at the time had a very structured classroom style of doing Sunday school, and we really struggled to get Callum to fit in with that. We've been to a couple of different churches, a few different churches here, and so we found that different things work for him and that every child is different. But we'll talk more about that during the session. So since I've been in Aberdeen, I have started my own business doing cross-cultural training, which is all about helping people to deal with differences as well across cultures. But because of having a child with disabilities, I very much work with this idea of my kid's different from everybody else, and how do you work that into a church context. Besides that, I also sit on a committee in an organization called Enable, which runs campaigns for people with disabilities all throughout the nation, and also provides services for people with disabilities. And being immersed in that world of seeing how people with disabilities overcome these challenges placed by society, and how they have courage and a spirit to keep fighting for things that, you know, they need, for being treated as human, really. Sometimes it's an astounding thing to watch, and I'm really humbled by, you know, watching them live and fight to be accepted and to be included. So hopefully this session will also shed a lot of light of how the church can also be a part of that.
Yeah. And what I do like to say, just for my own personal needs, is that I don't pretend to kind of teach. I'm not an expert. I'm a parent. We're all making our own way through life. We're all learning day by day. So I think we really hope that this will be a practical session as well, and you know, you can get out of it what you need. But that's the question. So why are we here? And just running through, you know, maybe there's many different reasons why you might have chosen to come to this room today. And maybe there's a child in your family. You're wondering, how can I get my child more involved at church? How can I bridge this gap? I do know families who have children with disabilities, and I've asked them, what's it like for you? And they've said to me, are you kidding? We can't go to church. They wouldn't know what to do with us. I think they're also saying, I don't know what to do, how to do that as well. So maybe that's some of it. Maybe you do Sunday school and there's a child in your Sunday school or at your church that you're wondering, how can I get more involved there? I just don't know what to say. Or a clergy person, for lack of a better word, wanting to help your congregation engage. Maybe just wondering what all this means. So I don't know if it's worth, you know, are there any other thoughts, any other reasons why you might have come, and maybe something that you're hoping to get out of this? Or have I kind of ticked most of the boxes there? Most boxes. What do we hope that you will get out of this session, which is important as well, but we've got to make sure that we meet in the middle. More information about ASN, additional support needs, which we will come to next, and how those needs impact on a child's life and a family's life. And we hope that you will also have a better awareness of how the dynamics of our church communities might impact on a child with additional support needs, and vice versa, and what kind of is happening in the dialogue, the dynamic of a child who comes into a church. Sometimes walks right in the door and nobody is prepared for it, right? Mm-hmm. This is, you know, all life is about being surprised continually, and so that's an important thing that we hope you'll take away. Of course, practical ideas about what you do, and I think that will come with some of our, I think already we all know more than we think we do about what to do. It's just a case of tapping those little parts of our brains that will give us ideas and how to engage, and resources as well for places to go. Not a lot of practical resources. Continually researching, and I'm not finding a lot of, you know, books for instance of games and that kind of stuff that you can do. So, you know, it's word of mouth and it's sharing. Anything else that you are particularly hoping to get out of this session? And maybe taper things to that, or again, is that pretty much a comprehensive list? Okay, so far. Feel free to jump in at any time with comments, criticisms, or questions, or whatever. We've heard it all. I'm not afraid. I'm running through it fairly quickly because I think the most most important bit is where we get to dialogue with each other. So that's why I'm running through. If there's anything you don't understand, stop me. Additional support needs. What are we talking about? Also known as special needs. The terminology is always changing, and a word that you were using is now problematic, so you have to kind of go back and forth now and again. But additional support needs is basically what it sounds like from the Aberdeen City Council website. A child or young person requiring planned extra support to allow them to better engage in their learning has additional support needs. And this is everywhere. They need it at school, they need it in their communities, they need it at church. So we can't expect, if someone needs a lot of extra support at school, we can't expect them to come in to church and be able to function well and really engage without a certain amount of extra support. And I think, I would use this little light, but I don't know how to do it. The word planned is actually really crucial. Again, you can't always be prepared for the surprises, but when you do have a child in front of you, it's important to kind of begin to put in a plan in place. We will get to all those things later on. And additional support needs can arise for many reasons. Learning environment, family circumstance, bereavement is classed as an additional support need. I think we would all agree a bereavement is a significant support need for a child. Disability and health, someone who's just moved into a new community, someone who doesn't speak English, social and emotional factors, all of those are, so it may be a little broader than I realize, or than we realize. How are additional support needs expressed in children? I'll run through these first and then we'll talk about and jump in anytime. Grace? I told her to stop me if I was talking. Difficulties with communication, often profound. That's your number one. And if you feel you can't communicate with the people around you, you get frustrated, right? This is very classic and understandable, but if you also can't communicate with each other, there's frustration on both sides. And how are we actually going to get to where we need to? Children can often not be able to express themselves clearly. My son, for instance, is nonverbal, so that's pretty significant communication difficulty. There are often sensory issues, dislike of certain situations for kids, and the spectrum, the autistic spectrum, is enormous. The spectrum of special needs or additional support needs is enormous. Just as much as any one of us, we're all so different from each other. There's no way to understand it. There's no formula. Just because you have autism does not mean they all hate loud noises. My son loves loud noises, so go figure. That's partly because he can't hear very well. So again, it's every person is so different. Delayed or impaired understanding of a situation. Again, we change things in our churches a lot. We change things in our families, our routines a lot, and take it for granted that you can keep up with, people can keep up with that. Oh, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do worship today in this way. We're going to do it in this way, and these are the reasons why. For someone like my son, that would be extremely frightening. So automatically there's a problem there. Become easily overwhelmed, anxious, upset. That's very clear from the other. That's why that would happen, right? I mean, if you are having trouble communicating, having trouble with the situation, don't know why something's changed, of course you're going to be upset. But what does this end up getting labeled very often? Bad behavior, naughty. I've seen this and it breaks my heart. It's not naughty. It's not bad behavior. I remember one of Adam's speech therapists was telling me a long time ago, listen, if you put me in an adult calculus class or calculus 4 class, I would behave badly. Mm-hmm. Everyone has situations you don't feel comfortable in, and we do act out. We act out in socially appropriate ways because we know we're supposed to, right? And then go home and vent to your husband later on or whatever, punch a pillow. But kids with additional support needs can't always filter that. So I think it's very, it's not necessarily that it's bad. This is how they're expressing something. So, but yes, it can potentially lead to a bad experience. What I realized after I'd done this is that that's all negative. There are many wonderful ways that additional support needs are also expressed. And I mean, I just, my son, for example, bore you to death with stories about him. Believe me, I could go on. He doesn't understand the concept of greed or jealousy in the ways that we do. So that, he's free from that. He doesn't criticize me. He doesn't complain. Those kind of things. There are lots of good things about additional support needs, and I think it's freeing ourselves to kind of see the person and not the syndrome or the label or whatever. We're getting to the people that we're working with, which is really the key, isn't it? And that's what we want to do in our churches, full stop. We want to get close to people and allow them to get close to God, because that's what we're about. Are you going to say something?
No, I was going to say sometimes the logic that you find in people or children who have additional support needs is just fascinating, and to be able to appreciate that, I think, is really important. There was, just to give an example of just the weird logic sometimes that we think is really weird, was my son Callum. One time we heard him say 3 quiet, 4 quiet, 5 quiet, 6 quiet, and it was just like, what is that? So we listened again, and he went back to the beginning. He picked up this phrase from Shrek, the kids movie, and he started again. It's quiet, 2 quiet, 3 quiet. And to him that made sense. That was a different way of looking at it, but they will also bring a very different perspective to looking at faith and God for the ones that can in some way understand a bit of that. And it's just amazing sometimes what they do come up with.
Yeah. I think I'm going to hand it over to Grace now.
All right. So
Yeah, it is really I thought it was just me.
So we're now going to turn our attention to what are currently most of our church communities like. And I think if any of you want to contribute as well and say if your church is any different from this, but generally we experience church services as they're really verbal expressions which involve being able to read, being able to understand cognitively your faith. We equate faith with the whole ability to understand things, and so therefore if you don't understand, then how can you believe, and there's very much that idea. It is also very much a corporate experience. We have to come together, which again involves there being lots of people in a room, and sometimes for children with sensory difficulties that can present problems because of the noise factor, the crowd factor, there's all of that. It's also, as I said before, based on the ability to understand. Also, some churches will have more complex rituals, traditions, the use of big words and concepts, very much heavily invested in verbal communication. Every church has a ritual, has a practice of some sort. First we do this, then we do that, and there is a way of working your way through a service. Does anybody come from a church situation where none of this is the case? Or that you do church slightly differently from how this is portrayed? So everybody has this mix in their church. Yeah. Anybody have any experiences of seeing how any children with additional support needs have reacted or behaved in these contexts? Anybody want to share a story or two?
Yeah, we'd done a holiday club, and there was a boy who was spectrum non-verbal, and he came with his family. And during the holiday club, we were able to. Someone was able to sit with him kind of one-to-one, but on Sunday we hadn't planned, we hadn't thought. So he was up on the stage, up in the chancel, communion table, stepping on the seats, and just aware that there was a sense of, and there were lots of people who knew, but there was also the sense that people thought this was naughtiness or bad behaviour, and why wasn't Dad stepping in? So that was I happened to be taking the service that day, so I knew, but in my head was, do I say something? Does that draw attention? What about his dignity? It's a family service, so there's a bit of scope for, but it actually was really good as a starting point to talk about, well, what happens if our young friend comes again, and how do we work that? And the next time we came was on Remembrance Sunday. So another strange cultural context where there's different rituals, but folk knew, and so it has a much different feel, even though, you know, it was Remembrance Sunday, and in our church we do a kind of Remembrance Sunday, but because folk knew and there was kind of a plan, or more of a plan in place, it felt very different. But it was quite an interesting, in all kinds of ways, experience, but a really good one for us as a church.
I remember along those lines, Palm Sunday, I'm in the Episcopal Church context, so Palm Sunday, we always process around the church. And my son hated it. I remember dreading Palm Sunday. He's out of that phase now, so it's okay. It's not so bad at least. But I remember thinking, oh no, what am I going to do, you know? And so, yeah, we'll come back to that, just that feeling there in a few minutes. But yeah, that's a great analogy.
Because here's this dad who's brought his son for the first time.
What do you do?
First time in the church. Incredibly brave.
Yeah.
And he's not, he won't know how things are going to work out when he comes.
Yeah.
And wanting to somehow affirm that and communicate that.
Yeah.
How do you do that on a Sunday? How do you do all that on a Sunday?
Yeah. From up front. In the moment. Yeah.
I've seen ministers who have dealt with these kinds of outbreaks. So all of a sudden something very different is happening with one of these children. And I think it's so important at that point for the minister to stand up at that point, or just after that song has finished or whatever, and just cut in and just kind of go, you know, you've just seen this, and, you know, want to say again, we are a church where we don't mind this happening, feel free, you know, which we accept, we love, all these kind of positive things. I think that's always very good for a minister or the worship leader or whoever, you know, running it that day to say something like that.
I mean, Dan, you really illustrated, you know, and just now with that, Grace, that you know, what happens when you put the additional support needs, the kind of picture of needs and of, you know, the way it looks for a child. When you put that into our church context, you have often a recipe for just disaster, right? You know, there's potential, and it feels really high pressure and high stress sometimes, but I think this is where it's important to constantly be talking about it, constantly be affirming what has happened well, and be honest about what's happened not so well and what we'll do next, and be, you know, I think you can't ever be too vocal about that. So the question really then is how and where do we begin to develop a plan, a strategy, an approach that is useful in these situations? Because in a situation where you have a mismatched environment and a person, oh sure, one of them is there's water there, Grace. One of them is going to have to change or give, right? Somebody, this isn't going to work. Somebody's going to have to change, and change is hard. So my first, moving in a little bit more to the practical side of things, the how to kind of begin to approach these things. I mean, this is where it's still theoretical, but I think we have to have a grounding in what we're doing here in the first place. We have to really be able to have these conversations amongst our church and amongst our volunteers in Sunday school, and even, you know, parents. What are we doing? Why do we come together to do church? What does God want for us to learn and explore together? And sometimes we have these unspoken things in the back of our mind. Well, we come together so that we can sing hymns and listen to a sermon in quiet, and we do this, and we, you know, shake hands and we have our coffee. Where does that allow a child with different needs or a family who's in crisis? Where does that embrace them and nurture them? Sometimes, it's the unspoken things of what we expect out of our 1 hour, 1.5 hours on Sunday that kind of catch us up. So, and what is our purpose in children's ministry? What are we doing here? Maybe there's a need to reevaluate what we're expecting and whether that's the right expectations to match the people we've got. Maybe we can kind of begin to look at who we've got first and build a program from that. Does that make sense? Sometimes it's just, and you probably are all way ahead of this. I'm sure, we'll get some stories later on about how you've done this. You've already done it, whoop, this isn't gonna work anymore. We have a child who can't handle noise. Obviously, we're not gonna have loud music in our children's program. We're gonna do something different, or we're gonna support him in a different way. And how can we see all of God's children grow spiritually? This is what we want from church. We want everyone to really grow in their walk with God. So what does that mean? So what we need, and also what we lack, everyone needs time to journey in our own personal way with God. But often we have pressure. The sermon's going to start in a few minutes, whatever, we've got to keep going. We've got to, our church, everybody has to get out by a certain time because parking, start charging for parking. We're on Crown Terrace and it's extortionate, the parking costs. So, you don't have much time to kind of journey. And space, we all need space to be in our preferred environment. But again, Episcopal churches at least, we often lack space. I don't know how you all are, or if someone needs space to kind of go and let out some steam, is there a place where they can do that? Is it, are there cushions or something where they can sit? How can our space be reshaped? If we lack, that, how can our space be reshaped? Because children can't be reshaped. We can't make people fit into the mold we want them to fit into, unfortunately. I have tried that a lot. And so far it hasn't worked for me. We need volunteers to help lead activities, teach classes, work with kids, volunteers to maybe be one-on-one with a child who needs it. Do we always have those volunteers? Do we always have, if we have volunteers, do they always feel like they're resourced and equipped and able to deal with unpredictable needs? I haven't personally found that. I mean, again, maybe you all have stories that you can share about how you've equipped people. And that's, again, what I hope we can do is share good practice within this session.
I think that's really important because I know that when churches that we've been in have asked around for people to sit with Alan, a lot of them are fearful because they think, I don't know how to manage your kids with special needs. Like, do you all find that you would come across that in your own church as well? So I think, equipping the volunteers before you suddenly find yourself with a kid in the church is really important.
And it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a degree. It doesn't take, it's just, again, starting with the child in front of you is the right place, and the family, hopefully, who will be willing. I've worked with a church before where the family did not acknowledge their son's needs, so the church was not able to go to them and ask for help. And that's kind of a difficult place, you can appreciate. But we were able to try to make little steps, and so far it seems to be going well. But how can we equip people? Resources, we do, there are resources out there. We can find them and share them, and that's, I think, helpful. But again, it's, knowing how to implement them, and maybe the resources don't work, so you have to go back to being creative. And then do we have the time and the space to be creative? It's an ongoing dialogue, isn't it? It's an ongoing, and people change. That's the other rotten thing, is that we all change.
Yep.
And children change and develop.
Yep.
So
that's very true, because when my son was young, we tried this fresh expressions of church when he was about 8 or 9, and it was chaos because we kept meeting in different houses, and so he would just go ahead and dismantle the next new house we were in because he wasn't used to it. And there was no way we could relax in that context. But now we're again in a Fresh Expressions church. And he's a teenager, and it's fine because this cafe church that we're in, you sit around tables and you eat and you talk. And actually that works really well, no matter, and we keep moving locations. He's fine as a teenager with that now, and he wasn't as a kid. So again, your strategies need to keep changing with the child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, oh, I think Grace, you were too much this one.
Yeah. So when we went around a couple of different churches for our kids' needs and trying to find one that fit, we found that it wasn't just about the child, it was all about all of us as a family, because a family, you know, you may have children with additional needs within the family, but then you also have children who don't have those needs, and so trying to then minister to the whole family, I think, is also quite an interesting thing for a church to deal with. And oftentimes, it's not just about focusing on the child during the service, it's about the continuous care of the family throughout the week, because a lot of times these families are stressed. It is quite a difficult burden to carry in the long term to always have a child in your family. I mean, I was told when Callum was diagnosed by medical professionals, one of the things they said to me before they handed Callum back was, and by the way, your marriage will probably break down as well. And that was their way of saying that, you know, come to us and get counseling support before you feel that you need to, because you're going to be under a lot of stress. And long-term stress, it just becomes the norm for these families. They don't often show it, but they just live with this. And so the church then has to think about caring for them as a family, like what can you do practically during the week to help them, and not just kind of think about the service and limit, you know, all your concern for this child in the service, but to think broader beyond that. And when you embrace the child, of course, you embrace the family, to be sure. And they, you know, often need lots of things that perhaps you may not think about that other families may be fine without. And it's not just educating the child with special needs. Oftentimes churches have this agenda that we're here to educate your children about God, and so there's this education focus that you have in your mind, and then you get the struggle of this child cannot learn. So how do you help them to learn so that they can eventually accept Jesus and go to heaven? So if they don't learn, and then, you know, and then everybody gets stressed out about trying to find a program where this child will be able to understand their faith and then so be able to then accept Christ and go to heaven. And it's been a very interesting journey for me with Callum, because he can't understand a lot of the times, but somehow God is breaking through to that child. When I had 2 major operations a couple of years ago, Callum, who doesn't really understand abstract concepts, came to me, put his hands over me when I was lying on the couch, and said, God is our healer. Now, how did he come up with that abstract concept? I don't know. But God seems to, it's like almost every now and again he gets almost possessed by the Holy Spirit, and he goes into this state, a liminal state, where he will just say something that shows a God connectedness in his life that just freaks me out, because I just don't know what to do. This is suddenly not my child talking, this is something else working through him, you know. And there's been times when we've been sitting in the car and he'll say to me, he'll suddenly turn to me and he'll say, Mommy, do you have Jesus in your heart? Now again, that's a concept that he shouldn't be able to grasp. Jesus in my heart. It's very abstract. And I said, yes, rather freaked out. You know? Yeah, I do have Jesus in my heart. And he goes, well, I don't think I have Jesus in my heart. He looked really worried. And I said to him, oh, no, it's fine. That's easy to fix. Do you want Jesus to be your friend? And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, you just have to ask him to be your friend and ask him to come into your heart. Would you like to do that? And he goes, yeah. So I said, well, you talk to, you know, try and encourage him to talk to God directly. Well, you talk to Jesus and just say you want him to be your friend. And he went, okay. So right there and then he says, you know, Jesus, will you come and be my friend? And I said, he'll be your friend forever. And he goes, forever, yeah. And I'm just like, well, I don't know about you, God, but I'm counting that. And this morning, before I headed off here, he said to me, he looked very worried, and he said, Mommy, I've been very rude to Jesus. I think he's no longer inside me. And he looked inside, he looked really concerned, he looked at his heart, and he just went, I think he's gone. And I said, no. I that Jesus is a really good friend. He won't just leave you. And, you know, and he still looked a bit like, are you sure? You know, I said to him, well, if you're worried, just say to Jesus, I'm sorry if I was rude to you, please come back. And, you know, they'll be fine. And he went, oh, okay. And it's what Stephanie said, there's this sense of, they're just in the moment. They just don't think about, you know, too much. And it's just a simple faith, but you can work with that. You know, you can really kind of get them to that point where no matter what level of understanding they are, they can get certain things sometimes. And just work with what you have, basically. If you have a child, I know a family whose child is completely non-responsive. They just lie in a wheelchair. And sometimes when I struggle with my child, you know, I've heard this person say, well, he said, I would give anything for my child to be like Callum, because Callum will respond to love, he will hug, he'll respond, whereas his child's non-responsive. So at times when I get a bit down, oh my God, allow me to have a disabled child, you know, I kind of think, well, there's another family who would wish to even have a child like mine. So looking after families, each family is different. Each one's going to have a different need. When we came to our recent church that we're in now, the minister, the first time he sat down and had coffee with us, one of the first things he said was, tell me about Callum. What are his needs? What can we do to support him? And for a parent to hear that from a minister, that's just gold. Yeah. So, if you think about the ideal church, it's one thing to say that we accept you, but how flexible is a church really to adapt and respond? That's probably something that we can talk about when we go to the group work as well. So, you know, is church a community where people are really welcomed? I know Callum, even if he is disabled, he can sense the churches, the church communities we've been in where people have been welcoming. They don't know a lot about support needs and stuff, but they come up to him and they engage with him and they wrestle with him and they say hi. And in those communities, you know, he feels like he wants to come, he joins in. There's been other communities where people kind of look at him and are really fearful, and he stays outside doing the tea and coffee. He doesn't come in, and I've tried to get him to come in and he just goes no. And I've actually realized after a few different churches we've been in that the difference is the reaction of the church community to him. It's not about so much training and equipping, but it's about the heart response of welcome, and also the willingness to be flexible with adjusting your program to accommodate, you know, different needs and different families.
I think, you know, we were all in Rachel's talk this morning, which was fantastic, I thought. And, you know, one of the things that really stood out to me was her saying how every child has a ministry. And I don't think that's any different with a child with special needs. Even the most profoundly disabled children have a ministry. They have a place. And it's not just, of course you can be with us, of course you can be part of our community. It's, we're all part of this body, and we all need each other. And I think that is, when families know that, it's significant for them. And when churches know that, it's significant for them. And God works in those moments really to grow us. Those are the places where I think we grow. So I think we will do some, we'll do some practical work. So can we get into groups? And maybe if you get into groups where, you know, you don't know the other people, groups of 4 or 5. And, you know, we've still got 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes. If we could talk about, in your group, maybe an issue that you've had, that you've dealt with, whether you feel like you've dealt with it not so well or dealt with it positively. What kind of issue is that? What kind of things stood out to you? Maybe something significant that you learned in that situation, or maybe something that you would like to learn, or maybe you've not dealt with anything and you're just curious about, what would I do if? You know, if you can just kind of meet in your groups, and maybe we'll get some feedback afterwards. Is that all right? So let's break up. This is where we all wake up again. Questions to ask, and maybe, you know, dialogue a bit about what's okay. We were in our group. We were just talking about is it okay if I and yes, it's being affirmed that it is okay, but I think, you do need, especially in churches, when there's a weight of expectations, you do need to have people on board and supporting you and feel supported from both sides. There's my clicker. I did want to be a bit practical, just a bit. If I was asked to give 4 top tips for parents, like speaking from my own experience, speaking to a parent who's going to go to church with their child, I would say first and foremost, be honest. If as much as you can be honest about who your child is, who you are, what you're willing to do and not do. If you are dealing every single week with social workers and school visits and doctor appointments and this, that, and the other, and you need an hour off, be honest about that. It's okay, but you have to, again, there has to be a plan in place to support your child and the people who will be working with your child. So I really need an hour off. We're going to figure out how to put a plan in place so that everyone is supported and I can get that hour. Be specific with what your child needs and what you need. And the same thing. Be realistic. Churches do not automatically know how to deal with this. And often you find people who are working in children's work, what are they? Teachers. What are they? Nursery nurses. They already work with kids through the week. Still doesn't mean they're going to know how to deal with your child or what you expect. You have to have a dialogue. It takes time for these kind of supportive relationships to grow. And there's a lot of awful Sundays. There's a lot of times when we get it wrong. And that's why I think the 4th one is be prepared to teach and teach and teach and just keep, and if possible, it's not a failure for anyone. It's okay. We've learned from this. We need to make sure and have that back door locked because my child will escape, and that's not your fault, and that's not his fault or my fault. But we need to be sure that we've got a safe plan in place so that everyone feels confident. And again, if I could go the other way around and have 4 top tips for churches, actually I was cheating a little bit, there's more than 4 there. Be flexible, but be consistent. Sounds a little bit, it's, again, we're never gonna get this right all the time. If something is not working, the child is not gonna listen to Jonah and the whale story today. He's gonna just come and sit right inside the door and not move. It's fine, he's inside the door. He's listening to something. You don't know what, we don't need to know what's going on. We don't need to know what he absorbs from this Sunday. He's there, we can deal with that, we can be flexible. But where a child is expecting something, can we also try to be consistent and not try to change every time? Change is very scary for children with special needs. Change is very scary for us all. And we also need to be very graceful, gracious, understanding of ourselves as well, that we're all going to have a hard time readjusting every single week and trying to get it right and not doing it right. Be patient. Again, also known as be satisfied. Be satisfied with what happens. What happens is God knows what's happening for us, and He knows what needs to happen. And that's not for us to make. It's not for us to set these expectations, and therefore the child is then gonna accept Jesus and go to heaven, blah, blah, blah. God knows, He's in control of that. Be willing to learn and try new things. This is where we're out of our comfort zone, all of us, but I think it's worthwhile doing. Where you can try a sensory approach to something that you haven't done before, or incorporate music where you haven't done before, or use drums for a child who can't speak. Maybe they can understand that 1 on the drum means yes and 2 on the drum means no, or something like that. Try to incorporate different ways of communicating. When you see a child twig into something and their eyes light up, do that again and again and again, and teach other people how to do that. And again, there's no formula, it'll be different for each person. But there's something that will make someone's eyes light up. You know this, right? We know this. It's so much fun to see. Yes, everyone, never be afraid to ask for help. From the child, they can tell you themselves, from the parents. Going back to Dan's story about the dad who brought his son and the son was running around.
It was his daughter.
Sorry, it was his daughter.
Yeah,
His daughter. I wonder if even there would be a place for the dad to come and chat with the church. You know, if there was a safe space where the dad could say, this is what life is like, and you know, this is who my daughter is, and this is who we are, and you know, and then let the church kind of begin to find their feet for asking questions of him, you know, and he can teach. If they're not ready, you just work with what you have. We all work with what we've got, and pray. That's underneath. That's after every single one of those sentences is pray, pray, pray. We're just praying, aren't we? That God would help us to know what to do in each situation. Everyone has a ministry, so there's a place for every child. There's a place for them. I ran an event in West Hill last year, and one of the young men with Down syndrome came, and his place was to serve cake, serve food to everybody. So he just came into the kitchen. We never planned this. He came into the kitchen, and it was obvious, you know, here's your piece of cake, and here's yours, and every single person had to take a piece of cake, and everyone was delighted, and he was proud of himself. You know, that was just, wow, fantastic. Can we go and do that every Sunday? Can he serve every Sunday? Can we incorporate that? Can we have somebody who is willing to work with him every Sunday to learn from him and support him? Those kind of things. I think that's it. I think we just made it, maybe, almost. I've got a list of some resources. I'm not everyone has a place in ministry, and technology is not my place. So I am not a flashy kind of color and nice boxes person. This is just words on a page, but it's different resources that I've found along the way. And I've got some of these here. I'll put it up on the Facebook page as well, and I can make some photocopies here if anybody else wants one. Or maybe, you know, I'll let you take some if you want. There's only 10. I didn't know what to expect from today. Yeah, I'll let Anna hand those out. And then, and yeah, if you want one of these, please get me, and I will get you today. Thanks for coming. Are there any questions? Just really, it's really quickly.
If you would like to take one, though, these limited ones, then take one. And we'll see how they get on.
If you have any questions, come grab Grace or I. We'd be happy to chat with you a bit. And if you ever want some support at your church, a facilitated conversation, I'm more than happy to come. Grace is happy to come. We can come together. I'm happy to do that, because these are very individual kind of situations, aren't they? So, yeah.